Thank you so much, and it's such a delight to be here, and I apologize that I'm speaking in English and not in French. I'm also really pleased to be in France and to be learning a lot about the kind of radical ecological struggles, particularly those against big infrastructure projects that really have roots here in France, and I'm looking forward to hearing more, and I hope my work will be useful to these kinds of struggles. I've been invited to speak because of a new French translation of my collectively written book, Field Guide to the Patchy Anthropocene, The New Nature, which was published last year in English and now is available from Éditions du Sol. You're seeing part of the cover on this slide. The image is the work of my collaborator, Fei Zhou, with an inset of a monster from Filipinx artists Amy Lin and Enzo Camacho. For me, the painting expresses the claustrophobia of the Anthropocene. It's meant to be an underwater scene where we're trapped with marine plastic waste, looking up helplessly at the surface of the water. Underneath us are scenes of what's trapped in this condition. I'm so excited to have the French edition, and I want to start by acknowledging my co-authors, Jennifer Dager, Alder Kellerman-Saxena, Fei Zhou, and our esteemed translators, Philippe Pignata and Isabel Stengers. The book's truly been a common effort, and even more so with the French translation. I've titled my talk, Wonder in the Midst of Dread, to set the book in a big project for our times. How do we maintain a sense of curiosity, excitement, and willingness to learn, even in terrifying times? Coming from the United States, I'm particularly aware of the political challenges of getting to learn anything at all these days in an atmosphere of fear-mongering and authoritarian political retribution. It's a moment of humility and humiliation for those of us from the United States. But we see authoritarianism spreading around the world, squashing, among other things, environmental science and advocacy. As we figure out effective border-crossing modes of resistance, one of the things that still seems worthwhile is keeping up with the work we know best how to do, which for me includes telling people about the environmental challenges we face and better ways to address them. So most of my brief talk today gives a sense of how the book deals with this. In the last part of the talk, I'll offer a teaser from a new collaborative book I'm working on with a different team. How might we best show people how to appreciate the living world around us? In the face of multiple and escalating environmental crises across the planet, how might we build new publics and coalitions of researchers capable of remaining critically, creatively, and purposely engaged as we grapple with environmental challenges of our time? To explain the answers in the field guide, I need to put the book in relation to the Feral Atlas, the More Than Human Anthropocene, which a new edition as a book is coming out in French, as you see in this slide. It will be available in October, but they asked me just this morning to let you know that it can be pre-ordered now, and they're very much hoping. If you look up Atlas Feral under the Wild Project group, please consider looking at the French version. But if you're interested in the English digital version, it is an open access project at www.feralatlas.org. It brings together more than 150 scientists, artists, social scientists, poets, activists, and indigenous knowledge authorities to offer an empirical but multi-sensuous account of the Anthropocene. The digital project offers an original approach to learning about the Anthropocene, and on the one hand, it succeeded beyond our wildest efforts. On the other hand, scholars didn't know how to process a digital project as scholarship. Before his passing, I consulted with Bruno Latour about what to do about this problem. He said, you have to write a book. So we spent the next few years actually writing a book, and we hope it goes beyond the Feral Atlas project to develop a new approach for looking at what we call the new nature. So the rest of this part of my presentation explains some of the challenges the book addresses. First, mending the breach between humans and non-humans. Now, humans and non-humans have never, in fact, been separated. We've always coexisted in relations of interaction and interdependence, yet disciplinary-based knowledge practices have dug an abyss between us. Despite all the philosophical work that's been done to argue against this, in practice, we still see the disciplines plowing away at their separate fields without having much interaction with each other, which stifles urgently needed understandings of the environment. So our team proposed a solution, setting empirical challenges that foreground shared concerns and complementary capacities. We've asked researchers to consider the féraux effects of industrial and imperial infrastructure. This photograph, for example, shows the spread of the invasive plant water hyacinth due to the engineering of still water in India. The féraux effects of infrastructure. Féraux effects are born in human arrangements, but outside the control of human designers. Féraux is a word that's really hard to translate. It's a particular conceit of the English language. Feral pig is a pig that was born on the farm, but escapes and goes and lives in the forest. So we extend this. A toxin is feral when it escapes from a factory. An invasive plant like water hyacinth is feral when it escapes from the botanical gardens. Through the concept of the feral, we focus on the non-designed features of human action as it's remade the planet. The Anthropocene, we argue, emerges from the feral effects of infrastructure, that is, the large-scale remaking of land, water, and air. Just putting the problem this way shows how humanists and natural scientists are going to have to work together. Feral effects require research on both human and non-human histories. Historian Iftikhar Iqbal has shown how the 19th century building of railroads in the Bengal Delta interrupted the flow of water, allowing the overgrowth of that introduced plant, water hyacinth, which in turn disrupted agriculture and damaged human health. The growth of water hyacinth is feral because it wasn't the point of railway design, although it directly resulted from it. Indeed, we argue, the environmental crises of our time can be recast as feral effects. The overproduction of carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere, for example, is a feral effect of burning fossil fuels. By casting problems this way, we've created a shared issue for scholars of humans and non-humans. To tackle the Bengal Delta case, we need historians, but also hydrologists and biologists. Second, teaching patch to planet dynamics. For quite a few years, discussion about global climate change as a whole planet issue has been effective in mobilizing public concern from policymakers to high school students. Yet the ease with which some recent governments have been batting away all progress reminds us of the underlying weakness of this approach. It provides a singular target for deniers, easy to dethrone, and perhaps more importantly, a focus on climate change obscures the much larger range of Anthropocene problems, from the extinction crisis and habitat loss to the spread of long-lasting environmental toxins. And yet, environmentalists have been nervous about getting stuck in too local formulations, which might encourage not in my backyard solutions. We offer a third way, attention to patch to planet dynamics. Using the granular empirical studies of both natural and human sciences, we show how to find both grounded focus and planetary connections. The patch is our opening unit of analysis. Here, the Black Sea is a patch for understanding a jelly transition. Comb jellies came to replace fish ecologies here in the 1980s. Seeing the Black Sea as a contained patch allowed marine scientists to consider the respective roles of overfishing, biological imports, nutrient dumps, and weather challenges in facilitating the change. But even in a more open seascape, patch dynamics are important. Martin Vodopovich and his team showed how jellyfish cloning on marine infrastructure swept away the gas platforms, swept by currents, can fill up the Adriatic Sea. Infrastructures make patches of féraux effects. For the Adriatic jellyfish, this involved the rise of marine platforms, which allowed new concentrations of cloning jellyfish. This formulation also opens attention to how such circumstances are replicated elsewhere, not just for jellies, but also for other ecological shifts. Patch to planet. Patch to planet storytelling can be incredibly important for tracking anthropogenic disease epidemics, the spread of toxins, and extinction. Where and under what conditions did an epidemic begin, and how did it move? Forest pathologist Matteo Garballato describes the genomic work that uncovered the origin and spread of a devastating sudden oak death in the US West. What happens to buried patches of industrial chemicals? Sociologist Scott Frickel maps urban patches and their moving extensions. What are the reverberations of exterminating even one population of animals? Here's Aboriginal artist Russell Ngadiali Ashley's depiction of the killing of Australian monitor lizards by imported poisonous cane toads. It can open the story of the large number of species that depend on lizard burrows for shelter. The death of lizards cascades across regional landscape ecology. The Patch to Planet formulation revitalizes environmental awareness. Third, evoking wonder in the midst of dread. Humanists have worried that telling environmental bad news creates paralysis, and indeed, this has led to an overly cheerful environmental humanities, all care and creativity. Our team takes the problem seriously, but refuses that solution. For us, the problem is a challenge rather than an edict. How should we get people not to turn away, even when the news is bad? In Donna Haraway's terms, how should we train ourselves and others to stay with the trouble? Our solution has been to evoke wonder in the midst of dread. This means showing readers and viewers the richness and diversity of life on Earth while also attending to the specificity of threats and disasters without exaggerating or downplaying. Showing people how to appreciate life beyond a few charismatic species has been an important goal. For example, we asked zoologist Peter Funk to write about the tiny meiofauna, such as rotifers, found in most urban drinking water. It's not generally a public health hazard. Instead, it's an invisible world that accompanies us despite attempts to build sterile cities. Chlorination does not kill rotifers, and not all feral effects are devastating. Our project has helped stimulate and also drawn upon the current revitalization of natural history, both among professionals and the public. We also include stories of resilience in the midst of threats. Biologist David Skelly and his associates describe the success of green frogs in the peripheries of US cities, where they inhabit even the smallest wet places. Meanwhile, we also spell out concealed threats within the ordinary everyday. Historian Kate Brown tells of radioactive blueberries on our breakfast table. Growing on nutrient-poor soils, blueberries suck up radioactive cesium. As these examples have suggested, our mode of interacting with readers and viewers often involves a very close look at particular scenes to appreciate life in all its particularities. This is a natural history style full of appreciation, and yet that same natural history gaze can take us through histories of terrifying environmental disturbance. It's the specificity of these stories that matters in refusing paralysis. We don't say that humans are doomed by who we are, but we do show how chemically treated monocultures breed pathogens that then spread around the world, how non-human species take part in human invasions that displace indigenous communities, how industrial wastes negligently scattered across the earth accrue with toxic effect, and more. We use natural history, but we also push it. Instead of confining our natural history to the legacy of European colonial adventurers, we open our observations to those of indigenous people and others who've been marginalized. Our focus is not on indigenous cosmology, but rather indigenous empiricism, as this helps build an expanded natural history in which close observations of many kinds join forces. Sometimes we pair different forms of empiricism in creating case studies. Ernest Alfred, as a Canadian First Nations chief, we pair his account of the disappearance of wild salmon on the British Columbian coast due to commercial Atlantic salmon production with an anthropologist's account of the mechanisms through which salmon farming increases both the number and virulence of salmon pests and pathogens. In each of these cases, we expand the meaning of natural history, beginning its decolonization. This expanded natural history brings us beyond a blinkered kind of hope on the one hand and a blind terror on the other, wonder in the midst of dread. Fourth, show and tell. One of the mottos of good writing is show, not tell. But to get across our message, our team has needed both showing and telling. That is, both exemplification and explanation. We have been wide-ranging and creative in bringing together multiple modalities of storytelling. We've used exhibitions, digital media, and regular prose. We've stretched the meaning of maps and made artwork an analysis rather than an illustration. Our visual forms, like the field reports we curate, are space for multicultural and transdisciplinary collaboration, decolonization, and bringing together the arts and sciences. Consider how we opened up the concept of mapping. We were first frustrated in trying to map the global spread of American bullfrogs sent for rural development projects to supposedly feed people. Instead, these projects ended up killing frogs all over the world when the bullfrogs jumped off the farm and spread disease across the countryside. None of the maps we could find showed anything other than the specific locations for frog raising, which missed the point of feral escape. So instead, we drew this, the escape. We think it's a better map. Rather than pinpointing the geographic location where action takes place, what we call flow maps show the dynamics of ferality specific to each case. Each map we created is custom designed to show the blockages, agitations, transformations, combinations, processes, and entanglements through which Anthropocene worlds take form in the context of each report. So here we continue, wonder in the midst of dread. To introduce ecologist Marcela Cili Santos' research on the disappearance of insect pollinators in the commercially farmed Anolaima Valley in Colombia, we created an animation that shows one insect species after another disappearing. After the image of the pollinator disappears, the name lingers for a moment before disappearing too. This is just a screenshot and not the opening one in which the screen is packed with pollinators. The video is based on the order of disappearance Cili Santos noticed, so it's not just an illustration, it adds a layer of analysis. Our common goal has been to make connections across different cases and patches. This is part of our Patch to Planet commitment. For example, Feifei Zhou drew 4 Anthropocene detonator landscapes, which each tell a separate but overlapping history of the Anthropocene. This one is Empire, and it connects many stories of imperial programs for infrastructure building, both current and in the past. The perspective of the drawing is from the top of a hill, the viewpoint for the colonial observer, looking down on his possessions. Here's the story of British teak plantations in Burma in which elephants were used as labor, but later abandoned among the invasive lantana bushes which blocked their view and made them aggressive. And that's George Orwell killing an elephant in the background. Here's a gas exploration gunship, the noise of which keeps whales from communicating with each other and which disrupts relations between mothers and babies. This is a classic image representing a ship full of enslaved people chained to the deck. A new breed of mosquito evolved on those slave ships, and it's one that brings us yellow fever, dengue, Zika, and other diseases. The detonator landscape brings together many stories, past and present, to make an argument. This is the world made by the infrastructure of colonial expansion. It's one part of the Anthropocene. You'll have to take a look at the book or the digital site to see the 3 other detonator landscapes, which each collect a set of stories that show us a new aspect of the Anthropocene as a time of human threats to our collective existence. Explore the book and the digital site for quite a few other ways we connect patch to planet, as well as ways we make art more than illustration, indeed part of the argument. I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but it's actually much harder to write a book with a group of other people than to write one by oneself. That's because you have to work out all the ideas with the team. You can't just expect to divide up tasks. When you disagree, you have to keep sitting down until you come to something that everyone agrees with. So the reason to do it, despite this difficulty, is that collaboration is already on the way to building a field. Rather than showcasing a single person's bright ideas, the point is to make way for a set of ideas that could push forward collective thinking. So we need this for the planet. So I'm going to spend my last few minutes telling you about a new collaborative book I'm working on, this one quite different and with a different group of collaborators. Instead of consolidating ideas as we do in the field guide, we're tackling an empirical challenge. It's also an environmental challenge as follows. Most everyone agrees that wetlands are just about the most important ecosystem to hang on to life on Earth as we know it. Wetlands protect coasts against storm surges, they are sinks for excess carbon, they collect excess nitrogen and phosphorus from commercial agriculture, which otherwise poisons the water, creating dead zones. So if we agree, why are we destroying wetlands ever faster every year? Our answer has to do with the momentum of programs that conflate property making and draining wetlands. And we take you to maritime Southeast Asia to show you just how that's working out. Let me read a little teaser. The adventures of the clam, the mud, and the girl. If you happen to be wandering around a grove of Brugueria mangroves, you might hear a soft cluck. A particular kind of clam makes that sound, and because it's both definitive and hard to place, in parts of Indonesia, people call it frog clam, biakodok. Its Latin name is Polymysoda erosa. It's found only in mangrove mud. It climbs in and out, sometimes resting on the surface and sometimes burrowing deep. If we could listen to its stories, perhaps that clam could tell us of tides and storms and sediments. If we could only listen properly, perhaps the mud would tell us too. But let's add the girl on whose hand the clam rests. What stories might the clam, the mud, and the girl tell together? What adventures might they have had? Those 3 things belong to each other. The clam eats the mud, or at least the detritus in it, but then adds to it, recycling. The girl eats the clam, but nurtures the mud, which is the keeper of the clam's lineage. The girl belongs to the clam and the mud as much as the other way around. Still, they probably didn't mean to have a big adventure together. Then along came a different kind of belonging, property with a capital P, and suddenly they found themselves together, aligned against a behemoth. The book tells the story of this adventure, the clam, the mud, and the girl against the behemoth. Since it's a true story, things are a bit more nuanced. Property turns out to be a chimera, appearing in different forms with different proponents. Our protagonists, too, fracture, and the plot meanders. The story won't stay in place as a proper fable. The reasons it's worth opening the story as if it were a fable, despite all this, is the strength of the common sense arrayed against it. For several hundred years across the globe, progress has been measured by its banishing of mud, along with clams and mud-living girls. Sometimes draining wetlands aids state expansion. Sometimes it's an opportunity for investors to expand commercial rights. Sometimes it shuffles potential rebels to out-of-the-way places. These and other purposes pile together under a rhetoric of improvement. Getting rid of mud is an advancement of well-being for all, according to this powerful common sense. To tell the same story from the perspective of a different protagonist, the clam, the mud, and the girl, offers the chance to rethink the political and economic changes wrought by this misleading rhetoric. At the eastern end of the Indian Ocean, a sea of islands stretches all the way into the Pacific. All through most of the big islands, this is maritime Southeast Asia, a place where soft coasts have long supported clams and their mud and their foraging girls. Our story begins with worlds through these soft coasts once made and which Europeans encountered when they first came to trade and to fight. After colonial rule and nation states, we've forgotten those soft coast worlds, once famed for the wide-reaching trading empires they supported. Beginning there allows us to consider how strange it was that the forts and factories colonial powers built were embanked and drained, the beginnings of a new kind of property that required dry land, not soft coasts. Perhaps, too, from there, we might not be so surprised to hear about the resurgence of mud even in the midst of today's cities and developments. Mud keeps coming back, and sometimes, when we're lucky, it brings with it clams and girls. I hope this teaser intrigues you. Meanwhile, I'll be delighted if you check out Notre Nouvelle Nature. Thank you very much.